Hey there, and welcome back into another episode of the Route 1 Rundown. I'm your host, Steve Gorgie, and I'm thrilled to be back to talk some Terps. But before I dive into everything going on with Maryland basketball, just a reminder that if you're listening to this show, but you want to be watching it, you gotta go and check it out on YouTube. That's youtube.com/@Department of Hoops. This show is part of the Department of Hoops, and there's so much great stuff going on that network. Got the NBA draft right around the corner, and Matt Moderno has you covered with everything NBA draft related, especially if you're a Wizards fan. But honestly, if you love local basketball, you're going to love everything that's going on at the Department of Hoops. So make sure you check us out over there. You can also find me all across social media at the same handle. If you're watching it on YouTube right now, you can see it right at the bottom. It's at Gorg on Sports. That's Twitter, Blue Sky, Instagram, TikTok. I am on it all, and you can follow me at that same handle at Gorgon Sports. If you're into local sports outside of just Maryland basketball, you're going to want to make sure you're following me because I am talking everything local sports. Right now, talking a lot of Orioles over the summer as they try to claw their way out of the cellar and back into contention. We will see what the rest of the summer holds for the Orioles after that awful start. But this is a Maryland basketball show, so let's get into some Maryland basketball. I got some exciting stuff today, some stuff I'm really amped to talk about. Going to talk a little bit about Maryland's place in the Big Ten. Maryland has now been in this league for 11 years, and more so, rather than talk about like where Maryland ranks in the Big Ten, I really want to talk about the feeling of being in the Big Ten after a decade plus. And there was so much made when Maryland left the ACC, and the first few years maybe didn't feel quite right. But to me, there has been a little bit of a vibe shift the last few years when I watch Maryland in the Big Ten. So I want to talk about what Maryland's place is in the Big Ten now after over a decade in the league. I also want to kick off our summer check-in series, our Big Ten summer check-in series with Purdue. We'll start there. They are the team that is one of the favorites to win the national championship. They will be the favorite to win the Big Ten, and I will start by talking a little bit about the Purdue Boilermakers. I'll do this all throughout the summer and fall as we head into the actual college basketball season. I want to make sure that we're staying up to date on what's going on throughout the rest of the conference. It can be so easy just to get laser focused, dialing on your team and kind of forget about what's going on throughout the country, throughout the conference, especially with so much player movement right now in college basketball. It can be a lot to track. It can be a lot to handle. Don't worry, I'm here. I'm going to keep you up to date on everything going on this offseason throughout the Big Ten. But where I want to start today is with the non-conference schedule, because day by day, we're getting more and more news on what Maryland's non-conference schedule is going to look like in Buzz Williams' first year. And a bunch of these games were already known. Some of them are new, but I'm going to take you through right now what Maryland's non-conference schedule looks like so far for 2025-2026. So we know Maryland will play Georgetown at home in Xfinity Center. That's part of a 4-year deal. It's going to be 2 home games for Maryland at Xfinity Center, 2 home games for Georgetown at Capital One Arena. Really excited that series will return. Maryland's going to play the back end of a home-and-home series at Marquette up in Milwaukee. Of course, that is where Buzz Williams used to coach, so a lot being made of that in his return trip to Marquette. It's been many years since he coached there, but seems to be something that is getting people talking. Of course, Maryland hosted Marquette a season ago. It was a great game early in the season, so Maryland will go up to Milwaukee. Maryland will renew an ACC rivalry with Virginia. That's also part of a 4-game home-and-home series, 2 in College Park, 2 in Charlottesville. Maryland will play Coppin State at CFG Bank Arena in Baltimore, and there has been reports that Maryland will be part of this Players Era Festival in Las Vegas. So it's a MTE, multi-team event. It's a 3-team event. It's not official. John Rothstein reported it earlier this spring, but when you look at the Players Era Festival website, Maryland's not listed yet, so Rothstein's about as reliable as it gets in college basketball. When he reports something, it's usually true, but it's not official yet. And then also being reported that Maryland will host Old Dominion. So often on the internet, on sports radio, anybody talking about sports just with their friends, a lot of the time we like to complain, right? We like to say, if I was running this, I would have done it that way, or I would do it this way. Why do they always do that? Well, I'm going to do a little bit of that, but what I'm going to really do to start is give a big round of applause to everybody involved with crafting this Maryland basketball schedule so far. Big round of applause. And I know this is not, you can't give Buzz Williams a ton of credit. You can't give the new AD a ton of credit because the Georgetown series, that was signed last year. The Marquette series, same deal. The Virginia series, same deal. So really have to give some credit. And I know kind of not a lot of people want to do that at the moment. Give some credit to the old regime, to Kevin Willard, to Damon Evans for scheduling these series. Because if I was crafting my perfect Maryland basketball non-conference schedule, Georgetown and Virginia would be on it every single year. We're going to talk about Maryland's place in the Big Ten in just a minute here, but when Maryland left the ACC, I always felt like the biggest thing that was missing was the history and the rivalries of playing all the teams they had played in the ACC for a million years. Hosting Iowa on a Tuesday night was not the same thing as hosting Virginia due to proximity, due to history, due to a million things. And it's really nice to have Virginia, an old ACC rival, and Georgetown, a rival that's more in name only because they played so few times over the course of the years, but a rival due to proximity, because in the Big Ten, you don't have a lot of rivals due to proximity. The league is so spread out now, and the heart of it is the Midwest, where, of course, Maryland is not located. It's great to be able to play some of these teams that Maryland has history with, that Maryland has proximity to. And if I was crafting a non-conference schedule for Maryland, those two teams would be on the schedule every single year. Just like Kentucky plays Louisville every single year, I think Maryland should play Virginia and Georgetown every single year, because those games against schools that you have history with, that you have proximity to, when you're playing them in great environments, home environments, not on a neutral court, it really is a ton of fun. I did my most anticipated games ranking earlier this season. It was in the lead up to the Michigan State game, and I was talking about what were the most anticipated games of the post-Gary Williams era. Well, that Georgetown game, that first Georgetown game in forever at Xfinity Center when Maryland came into the season with such high expectations in that Diamond Stone season. I always call it the Diamond Stone season, I guess just because he was supposed to be kind of the crowning jewel, the cherry on top to a team that was expected to be very good and compete for a national championship. So in my mind, it's always the Diamond Stone season. But that year, there was so much anticipation for that game because of how good that Maryland team was supposed to be, because of the renewal of that rivalry. And it's just a game that I think should be played every single year. The same goes for Virginia. Maryland has so much history with Virginia throughout the years, even though I would argue Duke was a bigger rival at many times. Even North Carolina was a bigger rival at times. Even NC State was a bigger rival at times. Virginia was always one of the schools that you wanted to beat if you were a Maryland fan. So I love the return of these series. If it was up to me, those two schools would be on the schedule every single year. Now, what else would I do if I was creating Maryland's non-conference schedule? Well, I would always be in a really good MTE, a multi-team event. I would be in one of those big-time Thanksgiving week tournaments where you get a lot of exposure, you play some really good competition. I would always be in one of those. It looks like Maryland's going to be in one of those at the Players Era Festival. Again, they're not listed on the official website right now, but the teams listed on that official website, the men's teams listed, are Alabama, Auburn, Baylor, Creighton, Gonzaga, Houston, Iowa State, Kansas, Michigan, Notre Dame, Oregon, Rutgers, San Diego State, St. Joe's, St. John's, Syracuse, Tennessee, and UNLV. You look at the names on that list. I mean, how many national championships do you see on there in just the last few years? Baylor has one. Kansas has one. In the last 10 years, Baylor has one. Kansas has one. And then you'll look at the state of these current teams. Alabama, one of the easily top 10 most consistent programs in the sport right now. Auburn, a team that was unbelievable last season and has achieved an unbelievable level of consistency under Bruce Pearl. That is a great program. It's one of the premier programs in the sport at the moment. Of course, it was a Final Four team last season before losing to Florida. That is an unbelievable field. Gonzaga, probably the best program to not win a national championship. Houston came so close a season ago to winning a national championship. Iowa State has been right there. They had some bad injury luck last season. My point is, Tennessee has been great, and St. John's is going to be one of the top teams in the country next season. St. John's is a team that a lot of folks are saying can win a national championship next season. And of course, coached by one of the best to ever do it in Rick Pitino. Point being, that is an unbelievable field. And if Maryland is a part of that, that's exactly the kind of event that you want to be a part of. That's exactly the kind of event that raises the profile of your program. It's exactly the kind of event that excites fans. So I couldn't be more thrilled if Maryland's in that event. And then Maryland is going to be already, we know, in the 2026 Maui Invitational. Maui Invitational has been, for the longest time, the premier MTE in college basketball. When you think about those preseason Thanksgiving tournaments or those pre-conference Thanksgiving tournaments, you think about the Maui Invitational. I can't tell you how many Wednesday nights before Thanksgiving I remember coming home either from college or when I was living out of the state and coming home to my parents' house and watching college basketball late at night at the Maui Invitational with my dad. And it was must-watch TV. And again, it's premier programs. It's big-time games. It's the type of thing that makes people care about college basketball in November. So I couldn't give enough kudos. If Maryland does end up playing in this Players Era Invitational, it's a huge win. Maryland will be in Maui. That's a huge win. The next season, the 2026-2027 season. That is an absolutely huge win for this Maryland program. So that's another thing I would do every year, and Maryland is doing it. Now, what else would I do? What else would I do? There's one big thing missing for me, and it's you got to get one of Duke, North Carolina, or NC State on the schedule. Those North Carolina teams, they were the heart of the ACC, and they were the teams that Maryland fans love to hate. And if you ask a Maryland fan, what do you miss about the ACC? If you ask me, what do I miss about the ACC? It's playing Duke, it's playing North Carolina, and to a lesser extent, it is playing NC State. But there was a lot of history with NC State. For older Maryland fans, that 1974 ACC championship game, they will still tell you it is the best game ever played, even though Maryland lost the game. It's a game that changed college basketball because it really forced the end of the one-bid leagues. It expanded the tournament because Maryland was so good. Both those teams were so good. They both deserved a chance to play for a national championship. They both deserved a chance to make the tournament. So there's so much history with NC State. But look, I miss playing Duke. I miss playing North Carolina. That's something that is really meaningful to me. That's meaningful to a lot of Maryland fans. And you can debate whether it's feasible or not. I mean, there are a million people out there who tell you as long as Coach K is alive and involved with the Duke basketball program, they will never play Maryland. I don't know if that's true. I don't know if it's not. A lot of people will tell you that. Maybe it's not practical. Maybe it's not feasible. But if it's not feasible to play Duke, then I'd love to play North Carolina or NC State. And then I'd like to play another Big East team. And again, Maryland is doing that with Marquette. This home and home with Marquette has been great. And I call out the Big East specifically because there are so many programs in that league that are both very good and care about college basketball and are in close enough proximity to create a really fun environment. Imagine playing a home and home with St. John's, where you go to the Garden for one, St. John's comes down with Rick Pitino to Xfinity Center for one. Are you telling me that wouldn't sell out the place? Are you telling me there wouldn't be 1 million Maryland fans at the Garden? There's 1 million Maryland fans in New York. There's 1 million Maryland fans in New Jersey, 1 million Maryland grads in that tri-state area. That would be a monster event for Maryland. Same thing with UConn. I'd love Maryland to go up to Stores or Hartford and play UConn there. Have UConn, one of the premier programs in the sport, come down here and play a game. There's so much opportunity with the Big East because of the proximity, because of the history of that league, because the amount that they care about basketball. Those are games I want to see. Those are the teams I want to see Maryland play. And of course, how can I forget, just about 90 minutes up the road, you have Kevin Willard in Villanova. You think that place wouldn't be going nuts? You think Xfinity Center wouldn't be going nuts when Kevin Willard came back to Xfinity Center? Now, I have no idea if he would ever do it. Who knows if he would agree to it? But Maryland and Villanova just finished up playing a series against one another. So that's the other thing I would do. And then you fill out the schedule to me with 3 to 4 games against decent mid-majors. If you play a 3-game MTE, then you got 3 games to fill out in my scenario. If you play a 2-game if you play a 2-game MTE, then you have 4 games to fill out. But what I would like to see, my big thing here with the remainder of the schedule, and I get that you got to have some home games so you can sell concessions and you can make money and all that other good stuff. But my thing with this is, let's schedule some decent mid-majors, local mid-majors from the A10, from the CAA, and let's not play all these teams that are just terrible. Last year, Maryland played 5 teams with a KenPom of 300 or worse. Now, you look at those leagues, the A10 and the CAA, of course, VCU, perennial tournament team, really good. You could schedule them, certainly. Your schedule just gets that much harder. But I don't have a problem with the hard non-conference schedule. But if you want to schedule some games that you really should win, you don't have to look very far. George Mason was top 100 in KenPom last season. St. Joe's in Philly was top 100 in KenPom last season. GW was 128th in KenPom last season. Towson won the CAA regular season title and was 152nd in KenPom. Those are the types of games that you still should win. They're local, so they might generate a little bit more excitement. I mean, there was a time when Maryland and GW were playing the BB&T Classic all the time that I felt like GW was really a rivalry because GW won a few of those games too. But those are the types of games that are not going to kill your non-conference strength of schedule like Maryland's schedule did last year. Maryland played 9 home non-conference games. The only one anybody really cared about from a fan perspective was Marquette, and they played a bunch of teams that were non-competitive even in their own leagues. And it really hurt Maryland's non-conference schedule. I thought it really hurt the perception of Maryland throughout the season. We know it's something that the tournament selection committee cares about, that they value, and I thought it hurt Maryland. You add to the fact that in a bunch of those games, you were drawing absolutely nobody into the stadium. And these are listed numbers that I'm going to read out here. For the Canisius game, there was under 10,000 fans listed. For Alcorn State, under 10,000. For St. Francis, just over 10,000. For Maryland Eastern Shore, just over 11,000. Now, this is a stadium in Xfinity Center that holds nearly 18,000 people. It looks barren when it's half full like that. And let's be honest, I was at a lot of those games. I would wager that there were some games where the actual attendance, actual butts in seats, were no more than 5,000-6,000 people. I'm not kidding. I have some pictures. I mean, my main Maryland basketball group chat, I would send these pictures at tip-off of every game. And it was pathetic, and it's not fun to go to. It's not an environment that anybody wants to be at, but I don't blame people for not going to those games. You have to give people a reason to want to go to a game. And the schedule that I just laid out there, where you play Georgetown every year, Virginia every year, a Big East opponent every year, one of those 3 North Carolina schools every year, you play an MTE, and you play a few locals, quality locals at home. I think that's a schedule that gets people more excited because with those 4 kind of high major opponents, you're going to play 2 on the road, you're going to play 2 at home. But that gives you 2 really big home games, 2 home games to get excited about. And then you add in like a game against GW, a game against George Mason. They'll bring some fans. There might be a little more interest because they're local. They're not bad teams at all. I could see that being a much better way to build excitement, to build a fan base, to build energy around a team in a sport that a lot of people don't pay any attention to until mid-February, sometimes early March. I also do like the idea that they're playing a game in Baltimore. I think that's a very good thing. If they wanted to rotate Coppin State, Morgan State, Towson, a bunch of the Baltimore area schools at CFG Bank Arena, I wouldn't have any problem with that. I do think it's a good opportunity, especially as somebody that lives here in Baltimore, in the city. It can be tough to get to College Park for a game on a Tuesday night. I've had many 90-minute drives to College Park on a Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday night, Friday night, where you're like, why am I doing this to watch them go play Canisius? So you provide that opportunity. It creates some energy here in Baltimore. It lets Baltimore Terps know, hey, we care about you. We're thinking about you. We value you. It shows the city of Baltimore you value it, that you want the city to be a Terp city, be a Maryland city. So I really like that too. Maybe you do something like that. But to me, the most important thing is if you can get those 4 high major games. Virginia every year, Georgetown every year, one of Duke, North Carolina, NC State, and one more Big East opponent. You add that to MTE, a high-profile MTE, like Maryland is probably going to play this year, like they are definitely going to play when they go to Maui, and I think you really have a recipe for putting together a non-conference schedule that will generate excitement when in the past you just haven't really been able to do it until conference play has started. And really, you haven't been able to do it until you showed some success in conference play. And look no further than last season. I think part of that was because they played this weak non-conference schedule where nobody really knew, okay, how good is this team? We really haven't had a reason to watch them. We haven't had a reason to get excited about them. The one game they played was a good game, but they lost. We don't really know much about this team. I think if you schedule a little bit differently, it can really change some of that. Now, of course, the other 2/3 of your schedule is made up of conference play, and that's what I want to talk about next. I want to talk about the conference that Maryland has now played in for 11 seasons. And I'll be honest with you. When Maryland announced the move to the Big Ten, I hated it. I hated the fact that Maryland was going to leave behind everything that I held dear as a Maryland fan. Everything that I thought was special about Maryland basketball to go to this conference that was football focused, that was Midwest based, that Maryland had no history with, that for many years I thought played a really ugly style of basketball, a grinded out football-esque style of basketball that was so different than what we were used to watching in the ACC. And those feelings were certainly emotion-driven. In my head, I knew, I could see the state of college sports, the way things were moving, why it was so important for Maryland to get into a league like the Big Ten. So with my head, I said I get it, but with my heart, I said I hated it, especially because at Maryland, basketball has always been the most important thing. The ACC was a basketball-focused, basketball-driven league. That's where all of Maryland's rivalries were. And you were now asking Maryland to go into this football-first league based in the Midwest where they had no rivalries in either sport and really felt like Maryland was selling its soul for money. Now, again, I understood why Maryland had to do it. It made complete logical sense. And at this point, 11 years later, since Maryland has now been in the league for 11 full basketball seasons, 11 full football and basketball seasons, I am thrilled that Maryland did it. And it's not only because of the way that the ACC has exploded and become this monstrosity of a league that doesn't even resemble the league Maryland left, much less the league that I grew up with the perfect 16 game schedule, the double round robin. You played everybody home and away. There were unbelievable teams, unbelievable players, unbelievable coaches throughout the league. It doesn't even look like that league anymore. But it's not only because of that. It's not only because of what the ACC has become. I have started to feel over the last couple of years like Maryland is really starting to belong in the Big Ten, at least when it comes to basketball. Now, football is a little bit of a separate conversation. Maryland's had its ups and downs, certainly. They've struggled against the big boys of the league. They've had some good seasons. They've had some bowl seasons. But with Maryland football, it's always been, can they get over the hump against Ohio State, against Penn State, against Michigan? And they haven't been able to do so. That's another conversation for another day. This is really a Maryland basketball show. I want to stick to basketball. I don't want to act like I'm ignoring football because it's a huge part of this conversation and why Maryland is even in the Big Ten. And I am by no means like a Maryland basketball only person. I love the football program. I root for the football program. I was a season ticket holder while I lived in Atlanta. I could only go to a couple games a year. I care deeply about Maryland football. But this is a Maryland basketball conversation. And I have started to feel like Maryland basketball really does belong in this conference in the last couple of years. And the Big Ten, I didn't get it at first. I didn't get it when they made the move. Again, I talked about how I had this perception of the Big Ten that they played this slow it down, grind it out style of basketball that was football on hardwood. And to some extent, I still felt that way a couple years in. But Maryland now has developed history with these teams. And maybe that's all it was ever going to take, was playing these teams enough times to say, oh, that Michigan State game, that was brutal. Or, oh, that Michigan State game. I'll never forget that Michigan State game when Melo threw out that crossover at the end of the half and hit the three. Or that Michigan State game that Melo hit the three at the end of the game. Like, you can kind of just do that now, right? You can say, oh, remember that Michigan State game? Oh, remember that Michigan game? Remember the Juwan Howard, Mark Turgeon fight? Remember the Adam Woodbury game? Oh, remember when Maryland beat Iowa and they were in the top 5? There's enough history now that you can really do that. And I think that is a huge part of why I have started to feel like Maryland really belongs in this league. You can point to teams and be like, oh, it's always tough to go to Nebraska. You won't expect it if you don't watch this league night in and night out, but you can now say, like, I know it's tough to go to Nebraska. Maryland has had games where they walk in there and they come out with a loss. You don't expect it, but they have that crowd. They have Fred Hoiberg. He always gets them to kind of elevate their game, and it's a tough place to play. You have these things, and it's not a good thing, certainly, but you have these instances where it's like Maryland always plays poorly in Happy Valley. And that's what you used to have in the ACC, too. You used to say, like, Little John Coliseum, Clemson, I know they're not the best, but it's a tough place to play for Maryland for whatever reason. Virginia Tech, Castle Coliseum, that's a tough place to play. And that was in the kind of modern era of the ACC. But you feel that way with Happy Valley. Like, I remember talking to so many people before that game last season. It's like, okay, if Maryland can win at Penn State, they're showing this is a different Maryland team than years past. And I think all of that stuff really matters when you think about how connected do you feel to a league? How invested do you feel in a league? And in turn, how invested and connected do you feel to the team that you root for? There were some years, even as Maryland was fairly successful in its early years in the Big Ten, certainly not quite reaching the heights I think a lot of people wanted to, myself included, but they were fairly successful. But I felt like there was a lack of connection still for me because Maryland didn't have that history. I feel like that history has been built now over the last 11 years. And there's not any part of me that says, I really wish Maryland was in this new monstrosity of an ACC. I think the other part of it, too, is what I've grown to learn about the Big Ten over the past 11 seasons, is that while the ACC had some unreal environments at the very, very top of the league, Cameron Indoor Stadium is one of a kind. The Dean Dome, people will call it a wine and cheese crowd, but the place is huge. It's a place that deeply cares about college basketball. There's so much history there. And when the place gets going, it's a fun place to watch a game, whether you're there in person or whether you're watching on TV. I think Castle Coliseum's one of the more underrated places down in Blacksburg. But there's a bunch of places that are really good, but the depth of atmospheres in the Big Ten, I think, far surpasses the ACC rather. And when I say that, I think about a place like Nebraska where there is so little basketball history there. They have not been very good, but they pack that place. They show up, and it's a big deal every time they roll out a ball. And on a night in and night out basis, it feels like a bigger deal to me playing in the Big Ten. For the most part, there are exceptions, but for the most part, when you're going to Assembly Hall, when you're going to East Lansing, when you're going to Ann Arbor, even when you're going to Minnesota, they have that distinct look with that elevated court. All of these places on a night in and night out basis actually feel a lot more important to me than going to Wake Forest. To going even to NC State, where they play in what's more of a pro-type arena. Of course, the Carolina Hurricanes play there as well. I think when you look top to bottom, the Big Ten just has better atmospheres, and it feels more important, especially when you compare it to now going to Cal, going to Stanford, going to Boston College. The Joyce Center at Notre Dame, at times, they've had some good crowds over the years. But by and large, I look up and down that league, and I just don't think it compares from an atmosphere perspective. And now that Maryland has some history, now that Maryland really has some history in this league, there is not any part of me that would want to go back to the ACC. Now, could I go back to the 9-team ACC in 1999? Would I do it? In a heartbeat? But that ACC doesn't exist. Those coaches are no longer coaching. Those programs are completely different now. And I'd rather, on a night in and night out basis, go to those places that I mentioned in the Big Ten, where you have these unbelievable crowds. You have people really, really invested. I mean, I can go up and down. I didn't even call it Illinois. That's one of the best places to play. Mackey is an unbelievable place to play at Purdue. That's a great environment. There are so many good places to play, so many tough places to play, so many places where people really really care about the basketball program. Would I rather do that than go watch games at SMU and Florida State, as good as Florida State was for years under Leonard Hamilton? The crowds were never great there. Would I rather watch games at Miami and Wake Forest and Georgia Tech? No. Give me the teams in the Big Ten every day of the week, especially now that Maryland has built up some history, especially now that it feels like there is more of a connection to the league. Now let's finish off today with our Big Ten summer check, and we'll start with a team at the top of the league, and that is the aforementioned Purdue Boilermakers. And Purdue is not just one of the favorites to win the Big Ten. Purdue is the co-favorite to win the 2026 National Championship on a FanDuel Sportsbook right now. It's Purdue and Houston. They're both 10-1. Duke 13-1, the defending national champs Florida 17-1, Kentucky 17-1, Michigan 17-1, Kansas, St. John's, and UConn also there at 17-1. But it's Purdue and Houston at the top of that heap. And this is a program that really has become the creme de la creme, to me, of the Big Ten. This is a coach in Matt Painter who, for my money, is the coach I would say right now is the best coach in the Big Ten, even ahead of Tom Izzo. And if you haven't checked it out, Matt Moderno and Greg Waddell did a Big Ten coaches draft on the Fear the Podcast podcast. That's on the Inside MD Sports, Inside Maryland Sports radio feed. So make sure you check that out. It was a really good episode. They drafted Matt Painter number 1, and I would too. Matt Painter, for my money, is the best coach in the Big Ten. And, I know for a lot of people, when they think about Purdue and they think about Matt Painter, they think about the Fairleigh Dickinson loss, the 16 over the 1 a couple of years ago with Zach Edey. They view Zach Edey, they think about Purdue, they think about Zach Edey, and they think this guy was just some cheat code. But Purdue has been one of the most consistent programs in the country over the last 10 years. The last time Purdue finished a season outside the KenPom top 25 was 2015. The last time Purdue got worse than a 4 seed in the NCAA tournament was 2015. Now, in 2020, of course, the NCAA tournament didn't happen. Purdue was 9-11 in the league that year, 16-15 overall. Yes, they probably would have fallen outside of a top 4 protected seed there, but we all know what happened that season. So the fact remains, the last time Purdue got less than a 4 seed, got worse than a 4 seed, was 2016. They got a 5 seed in 2016. So this is a guy in Matt Painter who has had this program really in the upper tier of the Big Ten, and more recently the upper tier of the country. For the last 5 years, I would say in the upper tier nationally, but the last 10 years in the upper tier of the Big Ten. And he's done it in so many different ways. Of course, when you think about Matt Painter, you think about Purdue, you think about the bigs, but you can also look back at a time when they had a guy like Carson Edwards, and they very nearly made a Final Four. They had that one year, and I'm trying to look for it now. It was the Elite Eight against Virginia that they lost that game in overtime. That was the 2019 season. They were so close to going to a Final Four. Of course, they have the Fairleigh Dickinson loss, but they get to the national championship game the next year, and they did it with Zach Edey. Don't get me wrong, they've always had a really good bigs, but Carson Edwards was the driver of that 2019 team. People think about Matt Harms and Isaac Haas, but they were not Zach Edey. Carson Edwards was the driver of that team. And when was Isaac Haas there? Now I'm just going down a rabbit hole on the air. Why scroll KenPom looking for Isaac Haas, what year he's played. He was 2015 through 2018. Harms was right after him. Caleb Swanigan was there with Isaac Haas too. They had some really good bigs, but Carson Edwards was the driver of that program. So this is, like I said, the creme de la creme of this league for really the past 10 or so years. They have been one of the most consistent programs in college basketball for the past 10 or so years, and they've taken it to an elite level in the past 5 or so years. And this year, once again, they will be expected to perform at an elite level. And you look back at what they did last season. This is a program that lost Zach Edey, one of the best players in college basketball, one of the best players that we've seen in college basketball over the past, 20, 30 years. One of the most dominant players we have seen in the history of college basketball. They lose him. They still find a way to get to a Sweet 16 last year. They give Houston a heck of a fight in the Sweet 16. And what do they do now? What's their offseason defined by? Their offseason is defined by the fact that they bring essentially everybody back. Who do they bring back? They bring back their point guard, Braden Smith, Big Ten Player of the Year, first-team All-American, the best point guard in the country. They bring back Fletcher Loyer at the guard spot. Fletcher Loyer and Braden Smith were two guys that came in together, and we had all these questions early in their freshman year. Are these two guards good enough as freshmen to really make a run? Are they the guys that you surround Zach Edey with? Can they do it? And of course, they lose to Fairleigh Dickinson that year, but these are two guys that they have grown, they have developed, and they are still here as seniors. It's really a throwback. How often do you see two guys come in together, a backcourt come in together as freshmen, and stick it out for 4 years together? I mean, you can't put a price tag on that kind of experience together. And Fletcher Loyer, Braden Smith gets a lot of attention, a lot of credit as he deservedly should. He is the best point guard in the country, no doubt about it. But Fletcher Loyer is a guy who has grown and developed a lot himself. You bring back C.J. Cox, who had a very nice freshman year himself a season ago. He's a guy who, look, this team, they got shooting, and they got it up and down the roster. C.J. Cox, a guy who shot nearly 40% from beyond the arc in his freshman season. He comes back. And then they go out in the transfer portal. They get, before I get to that, let me bring back, how can I forget the fourth guy they brought back? Trey Kaufman-Renn. He was an honorable mention All-American. He's going to play the 4 this season because they bring in a transfer in Oscar Clough, a South Dakota State transfer, one of the top 50 transfer players in the country, according to 24/7 Sports, who's 6'11", 260, one of the best rebounders in the nation. He was the second best player in the Summit League, according to Evan Maya. He was first team All-League. He was on the league All-Defensive team, and he is a guy who is going to just fit that Purdue mold of great big men, great rebounder. So you have Trey Kaufman-Renn and Oscar Clough in the front court. And Trey Kaufman-Renn is a guy who he seemed unstoppable offensively at times, especially early last season. I remember Maryland played at Mackey in December last year. It was early December, and Trey Kaufman-Renn looked downright unstoppable. Him and Braden Smith together looked like the best big duo in the entire country. Trey Kaufman-Renn went off for 21 in that game. Braden Smith, 24 in that game. It didn't seem like anybody could check Kaufman-Renn. It seemed like he was able to get wherever he wanted and do whatever he wanted, and there was nothing anybody on Maryland could do to stop it. And Maryland, let's not forget, had some pretty good bigs a season ago. Had a pretty good defensive big in Julian Reese. Had a pretty talented big man in Derek Queen. Trey Kaufman-Renn, who was playing the 5, he played a little bit of the 4-2 last season, but I when I think of Trey Kaufman-Renn a season ago, I really think 5. Maryland did not have an answer for him, and a lot of teams didn't have an answer for him. But this year, he'll play a little bit more at the 4. Oscar Clough will play at the 5. That is an incredibly talented group before you even get to the fact that they have Daniel Jacobson, a 7'4" guy, of course, another Purdue 7'4" guy who Isaac Trotter talked about when I had him on the show a couple weeks ago. He was a guy who was starting early last season as a sophomore, but he broke his tibia in the second game of the season and missed the rest of the year. He's a guy that people are really excited about. So this Purdue team, they got shooting, they got size, they got great guard play, they have a great front court. They are a well-rounded basketball team. The one question that I do have about this team, and I asked Isaac about it as well, is how good are they going to be defensively? Because there were times last season that this Purdue team felt like they just could not get a stop. When they needed a stop most down the stretch, they could not do it. There's a couple games that come to mind for me. I'm trying to find it here. Bear with me real quick. I think it was a Wisconsin game late in the season. They lost to Wisconsin at home 94-84 in mid-February. They lost in Mackey to Wisconsin. In that game, John Tonje went off for 32, and they gave up 1.45 points per possession. That is just not good enough. That's not national championship caliber. They finished 53rd in KenPom in defensive efficiency a season ago. They finished 332nd in 2-point field goal percentage. They allowed teams to shoot over 55% from inside the arc. Now, Oscar Clough is going to address a lot of that. But the biggest question for me when it comes to Purdue, and when I say question, I really mean this as, can this team win a national championship? It's not, is this team going to be a tournament team? It's not, is this team going to be a top 16 team in the country? It's, can this team win a national championship? The question becomes, can they stop you at the point of attack? And again, this is something that I talked about Isaac Trotter with a couple weeks ago. And if you haven't listened to that episode, go back and listen to it. It's well worth your time. Isaac, national college basketball writer for CBS and 24/7 Sports, he offered his perspective on it, and he thinks it's a legitimate question as well. He thinks it's a valid question. How good are those guards defensively? Can they stop you? Can they stop athletic wings? That's going to be the question mark for me with Purdue. Now, I think C.J. Cox is a guy who could be the X factor. If there's a guy who could take that big step up, I think it could be C.J. Cox. Of course, he was a freshman last year. You get a ton of development in your freshman to sophomore year. There were times where people did praise his defensive prowess. Can he take a step up, and can he really become a lockdown guy in 2025? I think with Braden Smith and Fletcher Loyer, you kind of have what you have, and they make it worth it because they're so good on the offensive end of the court. But CJ Cox, he could be the guy. He could be the X factor when it comes to somebody stepping up and really becoming a lockdown defender. Oscar Clough certainly helps inside. He certainly helps with the rebounding. I would not expect teams to shoot over 55% from inside the arc again this season against Purdue with Clough manning that lane. But the question really is going to be, when they play an elite guard, can they shut him down? That will be the question I think Purdue has to answer if they want to win a national championship this season. Hey, thanks so much for checking out the show today. Always appreciate you hanging out with me and talking some Terps. That's the show for today. Until next time, this has been the Route 1 Rundown.